And we want to welcome all the faith leaders to this meeting with the Ohio Secretary of State, Frank LaRose. My name is Jalala Ostam. I wear a lot of hats, but today I am the Ohio League Coordinator for Faith United to Save Democracy. I've been privileged to work with this wonderful group of faith leaders for the last couple of years. And even though we've all done our share of partisan work, this probably is my favorite because I get a chance to spend time with our leaders who are closest to God. And so it's always a good time to be with folks who are in the spirit. I want to move the program along real quickly. Reverend McKinley, I know that you're on, and I'm going to ask him to give us an opening prayer.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Reverend Terrence McKinley, Director of Racial Justice Sojourners. Glad to be with you. Let us look to the Lord in prayer. Gracious and merciful God, we honor and magnify you today. We know that good leaders come from you. And in these times, oh God, our nation is in need of good leadership, those who operate with integrity of heart and minds that execute wisdom and judgment. We thank you for those who are gathered on this call today, all who lead in their respective places, these faith leaders that are a part of the Faith United to Save Democracy campaign. We pray, oh God, that you will allow our time together to be useful, that it be edifying. But God, that we will be reminded on this day that you indeed are calling us, not by accident or happenstance, but you indeed order the steps of the righteous. And for that, we say thank you. Bless our time with the Secretary. We thank you, God, that we have this opportunity. Allow us, oh God, to remember those who we represent on this call today who are desperately in need of their voices being heard in this nation. We give you thanks and we give you praise. In the name of your Son, Jesus, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Reverend McKinley. Now I'm going to ask that we have an explanation of the moral framing of the campaign by none other than Reverend Jim Wallace. Many people know Reverend Wallace as being the founder of Sojourners. He is now moved over to Georgetown University, where he is the chair of the Center for Faith and Justice. Reverend Wallace.
Mr. LaRose, nice to meet you today. I just want to say these are faith leaders in your state. And while faith leaders will often say in conversations like this that we are nonpartisan, we are, but we're more than nonpartisan, because we believe the issue of voting rights is indeed a religious issue. It's not just a political one or a partisan one. It's a religious one. And when politics fails, faith communities must intervene. And that's what we're doing. Because we're worried about, let me just say, we're worried about the image of God. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, first book of the Bible says, God created all of us, all the citizens of your state, in God's image, in God's likeness. So voting is really about the dignity and the worth and the voice of every one of the citizens of Ohio. And so this is a matter of faith for us. Any type of restriction, voter suppression, if you will, of a person that is finally, because of their skin color, their disability, their minority status, their wealth, their vulnerability, is really a violation of the image of God. It's a throwing away of Imago Dei, throwing away of Imago Dei. So for us, this is a matter of faith. And so we want to be, we're in conversations. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, so I know Ohio fairly well. I'm a Midwest kid, but I'm an outsider. You all are the Ohio faith leaders that you're working with here. And for us, this is literally a matter of our religious faith to protect the votes of all the citizens of Ohio. So we want to help you in making access for every voter to have full access to their voting rights is something we want, we believe you want, and we want to help you make possible. But we're also watching all the secretaries of state we're talking to, and there are many around the country of both parties, saying we are going to be watching as religious leaders to make sure that access is granted. Because for us, I'll finish with this. This isn't just a political issue or a partisan issue. We are more than nonpartisan. This is protecting the image of God in the voting rights of every one of God's children, made in the image and likeness of God. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Wallace. And now we're going to ask that our boss, the coordinator of this effort, really explain to us what the purpose of Faith United to Save Democracy is, none other than our friend and leader, Dr. Barbara Williams Skinner. Dr. Skinner, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. LaRose, for even being on the call with us. We probably have some common acquaintances. The Right Reverend Dr. Otis Moss Jr., as I co-coordinate the National African American Clergy Network with him and work closely with Dr. Larry Macon. So Ohio concerns are dear to my heart. The Faith United to Save Democracy is probably different from a lot of groups that you have met with. It's unique in that it is nonpartisan, multi-faith, racial, and generational. We are crossing all kinds of lines and barriers because, as John Lewis has said, the vote is so precious, it is so sacred that it's got to be protective of everyone, white, black, and everybody else. Okay, it's really that draws us to this call today. And our goal really is to get from secretaries of state like yourself the rudimentary changes, the impact of any voting changes on the most vulnerable. How have the laws impacted the elderly, the disabled, students, military, people of color in general, the poor, those who have in the past been restricted in some ways? How is your office equipped to ensure that young people and others vote? And so we want to thank you for that. We also want to say that we are hoping that out of this call, we will have questions not only from people who are taxpayers and citizens in your wonderful state, but also people who are willing to work with you to make it work. And so, as Jim said, we are watching to see how you are going to conduct free, fair, and safe elections. We know that we hope that's your heart. It's certainly our heart. And to the extent that we share that in common, we want to work with you. And so with that in mind, I'm going to ask Reverend, I call her Reverend, but it's really Jaleda Aslam. She says, I don't want any part of that. Okay, Jaleda Aslam to introduce the secretary who she knows to all of us who may not know him as well. Thank you, Jaleda.
Skinner, it is not Reverend. Okay, Jay, for those of you on here that don't know, I keep getting materials with Minister and Reverend on. I'm like, Dr. Skinner, I am not trying to make God mad. Okay. I stay in my lane. I know my lane. I am a working servant.
All right, servant leader, Jaleda Aslam. How about that?
And you know that's how to say it. So anyway, we have I am privileged to introduce our guest of honor this afternoon to this meeting. Secretary of State Frank LaRose has been serving as a Secretary of State for almost 4 years. He is finishing up the last year of a first term. He is running for a second term. Before that, he was a member of the Ohio legislature, and I know most recently the Senate representing his district. He doesn't remember, but I met him during Senate Bill 5 when we were lobbying in the State House. So the first time I met him, that's when it was. And I will say that even though we had some disagreements, he was one of the few people in the State House who stayed in his office and had his door open to have conversations with people instead of just running out the back door and having us talk to staff. So we do appreciate that. See, I remember that. That was 2011. I remember that. But anyway, right now I give to you the Honorable Frank LaRose.
Well, Jelana, thank you so much for putting this together. And I remember those conversations as well. And the fact is, in the work that gets done at the State House, oftentimes the necessity is to focus on the areas of difference. But when it comes right down to it, we, I think, agree on a lot more than we disagree on. And that was one of those issues where, as you know, it was a difficult issue. And thankfully, things turned out the way that they should have turned out. And that is that the voters spoke, and we were ultimately, as a state, able to protect the bargaining rights of public employees. And so interesting. We could tell some more stories about that experience, and hopefully we always keep these kind of things civil, because again, we're all in this together. Today we're here to talk about voting rights. This is something near and dear to my heart. I will say, Reverend Wallace, I appreciate your words as well, and agree with what you had to say. I want to introduce a couple of members of my team. Monique Moore is on here. She is a rock star and is in charge of all of our community outreach efforts. She focuses on all of that, including minority community outreach, veteran and military community outreach, disabled Ohioans, basically all of our community outreach. I elevated her to that position when I took this office, and she has been an excellent leader in our team. Working for her is Henry Curtis. Henry is in charge of our minority community outreach. In his other capacity, he is a minister as well. He brings a background of elections experience. He worked at the Cuyahoga County Board of Elections, and he travels the state and works to make sure that this office serves all Ohioans. And I'm really honored for the work that he does. Grant Schaefer's on here as well. Grant is in charge of all of our external affairs. And so that is basically anything outward facing from our office. There's Grant. And so anything outward facing from our office, including public relations and community relations, is all under Grant's purview. So obviously that's a big job for him. Let me start by maybe setting the stage of where my heart is on these issues, and maybe some of my inspiration for why I decided to run for this office. Jelana, you know that during my time in the legislature, I got to work on voting rights issues quite a bit, and really kind of established that level of credibility as the person in the state legislature who worked on voting issues. I did the bill that created Ohio's online voter registration system, and it has worked, by the way, because Ohio has 8 million registered voters, and for a state of less than 12 million people, we're actually punching above our weight on the national average for having a high number of registered voters. Of course, we never rest on that. We're always working to get more people registered to vote. I did in the state legislature funding for new voting equipment, the latest state-of-the-art voting equipment that is ADA accessible and secure, and of course never ever connected to the internet. We did funding for electronic poll books that help speed the process when people check in to their polling locations. These are just a few examples of things that I did in the legislature that related to elections issues. But my beginning of this journey was when I first arrived in the state Senate. I was the only veteran there. Now, thankfully, there are more veterans now serving in the state legislature, but at the time I was the only one in the Senate who had worn the uniform. And so I worked on a bill with our previous Secretary of State to streamline overseas military voting, what we call UACAVA voting, that's voting for our overseas military personnel and overseas civilians. And so that was kind of the beginning of my work on elections issues. And you're right, I ran for Secretary of State. My motivation for this, and it's got to always start from a place of mission in my mind for the work that any of us do. Our mission at the Secretary of State's office is to help people vote and to help people do business. The doing business side is this is where new businesses start. When somebody wants to live their American dream of being an entrepreneur, that starts at the Secretary of State's office. Obviously, that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about our work of really guiding all of Ohio's 88 county boards of elections to make sure that it's easy to vote in Ohio and that it's an honest election, because that's something else that we all care about as well. My inspiration for this goes back to my time in the military. You see, when I served overseas, I got to see people vote for the first time in places like Iraq and in Kosovo. Where I was in southern Iraq, they were under threat. In fact, I saw them have their first election, and the bad guys that I was fighting against, these violent terrorist organizations, they told people an ugly lie. They said it was un-Islamic to vote. Of course, that's not true. And they said that if they saw purple ink on your finger, they would cut your finger off. Well, the purple ink was an indication that you had voted. You dipped your finger in ink. That was the way they kept people from voting twice. These Iraqi men and women walked out of those polling locations and held that purple finger in the air. They were so proud to have that purple ink stained finger that indicated that they were a voter. They weren't afraid. Maybe they were afraid, but they were courageous enough to face down that fear of the threats of violence that they faced. That purple finger they held in the air might as well have been another finger, if you know what I mean. They were telling these terrorist groups, I'm not afraid of you, right? I'm a free man, I'm a free woman. I did something courageous by casting a ballot. That same spirit was something that I saw just 3 years ago when I got to participate in a bipartisan delegation visit to Alabama. We visited Selma. We walked across the bridge. We got to sit in Brown Chapel where the marchers gathered up to make the march that eventually turned into the march all the way to the Capitol that resulted in the Voting Rights Act. We got to see how right here on our own soil, just 56, 57 years ago, our fellow Americans had to fight for such a precious right. That's something I'll never forget, this bipartisan team. And by the way, a quick plug, if you've never been there, you can still meet heroes of that struggle. And so don't wait. Take the time to visit Selma. Take the time to visit Montgomery. Take the time to visit these places. There are wonderful museums down there. I got to have lunch with Dr. Bernard Lafayette, who was a student at Vanderbilt, and he said, send me where it's hardest. He joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He said, send me where it is impossible to get people of color to register to vote. And they said, all right, young man, we're sending you to Selma. His work to organize a voter registration drive there in Selma led to the march, which led to the Voting Rights Act. And I got to have lunch with him, an amazing, amazing man. And again, somebody who's healthy and vibrant, and you can go meet him as well. So take that trip down there. To bring it back to our faith traditions here, I turn to the scripture on this one, and one that often comes to mind is in Proverbs, where it says, where there is no vision, the people perish, but he that keepeth the law, happy is he. It brings to mind to me, first of all, where all true power comes from, and we know where that is, but here in earthly affairs, in the affairs of men and women, we have the ability to express our vision so that we don't perish. That vision is expressed through our vote, our right to vote, our right to share what our vision is. To me, elections, democracy is it's an article of faith. Faith is something we believe in even when there's no evidence necessarily, right? It's something that we believe in because it's a deeply seated conviction that we have. Democracy works the same way. And if you believe in democracy, then that means you believe that every vote counts and that elections work best when every voice can be heard, and that you then respect the voice of the people. And that means if your favorite candidate wins, you respect the voice of the people. If your favorite candidate loses, you respect the voice of the people. That became, by the way, our mission statement as we were getting ready to conduct the 2020 election in Ohio. I wrote on the dry erase board in my chief of staff's office that our mission for election night of 2020 is that when Ohioans go to bed, they would know the result of the election and they would believe the result of the election, knowing that it was an honest contest. I heard a professor speak at one of our elections conferences in the past, and he said that we run elections so well that the loser knows they lost. And it's a simple but almost a profound statement, because of course the winner knows they won. They're going to go out and give a victory speech, but we need to run elections so well and so honestly and so accessibly and so transparently that the loser knows they lost. That's the ideal of American democracy. Sometime around 10 or 11 on election night, when the loser calls the winner and congratulates them. That's how it should work. And that's how the peaceful transfer of power should occur. I think that we've been able to accomplish that mission here in Ohio. We've run elections very well. We've made it easy to vote, and we've also made it hard to cheat. Let me end with this, and then I know that you guys have some questions for me. maybe this is a romantic notion, but it's mine. And I think that each generation of this country has left it a little bit better than they found it. We're not a perfect nation. We never have been. Our original founding purpose was human freedom, but it took us centuries to actually begin living up to that purpose. But the fact is, each generation has left it better than they found it. That first generation that fought the American Revolution, that great generation that stormed the beaches of Normandy and defeated an unimaginable evil, that generation that fought and struggled to win voting rights and civil rights, which is a struggle that still continues. That generation 100 years ago that worked to finally bring women's suffrage about, the generation that put a man on the moon and brought him safely home. I think that among the missions for our generation that work to create a more perfect union is to make self-government work again, to make democracy work correctly. It's an important mission, and I think that it's one that all of us should engage in. I think that you all, as a part of this organization, are engaging in that work. When I spoke last year to the Ohio Association of Elections Officials, several hundred of the men and women that actually run elections in Ohio, what I said to them is that elections are always political. Political campaigns are by their nature political. You're going to have candidates with differing viewpoints making their case, and then the voters choose which one they like the best. Of course, that's political, but election administration should be distinct from the politics of election season. Elections administration, the way we run elections, should not be politicized. I would argue that it has been far too frequently, and that it's come from strident voices on both the left and the right. I think that honest people of good faith should be able to agree that we want to make it easy to vote and we want to make it hard to cheat. We want to make sure that the elections are honest and also accessible. And I reject the notion that somehow this is an either or choice. I don't think you have to choose either accessible elections or secure elections. You can have elections that are both. I think far too often you'll hear voices on the right that say there's widespread voter fraud and elect us and we'll keep that from happening. But I also think it's irresponsible to claim without fact that there is widespread voter suppression. And again, when voter suppression occurs, it is ugly, it is evil, it is illegal, and we should fight against it. For that matter, voter fraud is ugly and illegal. And so people on both sides, Republicans and Democrats, should be able to agree that we will not tolerate fraud and we will not tolerate suppression, and we will work hard to keep them both rare. We have to identify them when they happen, call them out, and then work to prevent them from happening again. But to claim that they are systemic and widespread, I think cheapens the process and causes the average voter to lose faith. I think people should know that in Ohio, it is easy to vote and it is hard to cheat. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't make it easier to vote. Of course, we can and we should. But in Ohio, we truly live in a time where anybody who wants to has the ability to cast a ballot. And by the way, the evidence of that is clear. We have 4 weeks of early voting, more than almost any state in the nation, where any voter that wishes to can participate in early voting. And that includes evening and weekend hours. There are only 6 states in the nation that have Sunday early voting, and Ohio is one of them. And we're very proud of that. In fact, I myself have participated in Souls to the Polls. And it's a great tradition that faith communities organize and go to the early voting center after worship on Sunday. We also have no fault absentee voting, where anybody that wants to can vote from the comfort of home. I have proposed repeatedly for now 8 years that we make that process even easier by creating online absentee ballot application that currently does not exist. You currently have to print a dead tree piece of paper in order to request an absentee ballot. That is cumbersome for people, and I recognize that. However, to change that requires an act of the legislature, and so I'm going to keep working to try to get that done. But we also have in-person election day from 6:30 a.m. till 7:30 p.m. So really 3 good choices and ample opportunities for people to make their voices heard. I want to learn from you how we can make it better and more accessible. This office serves all Ohioans. We've created an office, or we work every day to continue creating an office that reflects the great diversity of Ohio. I've done listening sessions with minority community leaders all over Ohio because they're the ones that know best some of the roadblocks that exist for people in their community. And those are roadblocks that we need to work to dismantle every chance we get. Monique, under her leadership, organized a group called the Minority sorry, Monique, our group that is called the
Diversity Empowerment Council.
Yes, Diversity Empowerment Council. And I chose that word empowerment intentionally because the two things this office does are very empowering: new business creation and voting. That Diversity Empowerment Council is a diverse group from around Ohio that I meet with on a regular basis, usually quarterly, and they advise me on issues that pertain to making sure that people have accurate information about how to vote and have easy access to the franchise. So again, it's an honor to join you all. I look forward to answering any questions that you have for me, and I look forward to continuing to partner with you as we do voter registration, poll worker recruitment, get out the vote, all of those kind of things. So thanks so much. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. Right now, I'm going to ask Rabbi Miriam Turlingchamp. She is from Temple Shalom of Cincinnati, to ask the first two questions to Secretary LaRose.
Thank you so much. Will our County Board of Elections advertise the second primary to help increase voter awareness? I think there's been a lot of confusion around redistricting process, and it's made voters unsure of when the primary election is actually happening and who's actually on the ballot.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Rabbi. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention all of the wonderful things that Ohio's Jewish community has done for many, many decades in the space of voting rights and civil rights and human rights. And it's, to me, very consistent with your faith tradition of tikkun olam, to repair the world. And so thank you for continuing to be a part of that important work with your involvement in this organization.
Thank you.
Absolutely. The work of getting accurate information out to voters is something that is absolutely critical to this office. It happens through many different fronts. It happens through paid advertising, which we have historically done, including, by the way, a focus on minority media to make sure that we get accurate information out to the minority community and all Ohio voting communities. That's something that we will continue to do, including in this August 2nd election, which is an unusual circumstance that happened as a result of a court order, as you're aware. But it also happens through sort of organic opportunities. If you follow me on social media, and I hope you do, it's just at Frank LaRose. We are constantly using that platform to push accurate information out there. What we in the business call earned media, which is when I can get in front of a microphone or a camera to talk about it. In fact, down in Cincinnati last week, I did the morning show on the NBC affiliate. I was there bright and early in the morning to talk to people about the start of what we call UACAVA voting, which was last week, the beginning of overseas and military voting. I guess that was a week and a half ago at this point. And so those are things that we can do, but also it's not just what the Secretary of State's office does, it's really what all of us does. We've encouraged our boards of elections to be sources of accurate information. And I say that intentionally because there's so much inaccurate information out there. The best way to combat misinformation is with honest information and copious amounts of it. And so our boards of elections are that trusted source of accurate information. I've encouraged them to do things in their communities, community festivals, fairs, get out there and speak to the local Rotary Club or whatever the group is in your community, faith leaders, about really how we vote in Ohio and how Ohioans know that they can trust the process. So the short answer is absolutely making sure that 8 million registered voters and really 11.5 million residents of the state of Ohio have accurate information is one of my key priorities.
So glad to hear that. And I think it really dovetails perfectly. And we're curious if you're willing to engage a regional statewide listening session with faith and community leaders to hear, specifically in the minority communities, to hear directly from them about what concerns them most about the electoral process in 2022.
Absolutely. I mean, listen, this is one of those things I think our moms taught us, that you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and we should use them in that proportion. Too often people in my line of work don't. And so I'd encourage you to work with Monique and we'll set something up like that. But that's something that we do frequently. In fact, as Monique will tell you, attending worship with diverse faith communities is something that I've done since I first got elected. My daughters like to come along for that. Through our Diversity Empowerment Council, we hear those voices, and we also meet with business leaders. I got to shout out the African American Chamber of Commerce in Cincinnati. My friend Eric Kearney down there, who I served with in the state Senate, he has organized probably 6 different listening sessions for us. Those are specifically with the business community, but yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Now we're going to go to Reverend Ken Simon from Youngstown. Reverend Simon is the senior pastor of New Bethel Baptist Church, and he is the chairperson of Community Mobilization Coalition in our region. And Pastor Simon, I'm going to ask you to ask the secretary the next 2 questions, 3 and 4.
Yes, happy to see you again, Mr. LaRose. We met here in Youngstown, and glad that you're on the call today. We wanted to know that the collaborative election activities addressed in the passing of the 2021 biennial budget has many groups, many of us confused about the type of ongoing relationship we can have with the Board of Elections and the Secretary of State's office. Just wanted to know, have you issued any directives to the boards of elections regarding this issue? And if so, what number is it and where can we find it?
Well, thank you, sir. And I think the issue that you're talking about is the collaboration issue, which was unfortunately included in the budget over my objection, and we objected loudly to this. In fact, have tried to get the state legislature to modify this. This is an example of the state legislature swatting flies with a sledgehammer, as I like to say. They were concerned about private money being spent in elections administration, as occurred in 2020, where a very wealthy philanthropist put, a few $100 million into elections administration. They were concerned about that, and that's a reasonable conversation to have about whether we want private funding of elections administration or not. They said no, they didn't want that to happen. In their attempt to address that, they drafted bad language, and this is where I've kind of reminded them that before they pass a law pertaining to elections administration, they should talk to the people that administer elections, because we would have advised them differently on this particular language. What they wrote was far too broad, and if you, depending on what lawyer reads it and how aggressively they interpret it, it could make it sound like really boards of elections can't work with anybody outside the Board of Elections for anything. Poll worker recruitment, voter registration, anything. Now, they have told me that was not their intention. However, the plain black and white letter of what they wrote does make it look like that could be one reasonable interpretation of it. Because they've told me that their narrow intention when they drafted that was to prevent outside, wealthy groups from putting money into boards of elections, because that was their intention, and they told me this was not their intention. I have told the boards of elections that the way I interpret this is that they are not prohibited from engaging in the normal work that we've done for a long time. I'll give you a few examples of the stuff that we were doing in 2020. I personally stood in the drive-through food line at food banks and passed out voter registration forms and absentee ballot request forms. And we were doing that at dozens of food banks around the state. We worked with barbershops and beauty salons, an effort that we called Styling for Democracy. Right here in Columbus, my friend Al Edmonds, who owns a Cut Above the Rest barbershop on the Near East Side of Columbus, he did over 2,000 voter registrations right out of his barbershop, because he would walk out front and wave the neighbor kids down when he didn't have somebody in the barber chair. And he would say, "Hey, you turned 18 this year, get in here and register to vote." Those are the kind of things that we would never want to see impacted by this poorly written law. And so we've made it clear to the boards of elections that that is core to the work of running elections, getting people registered, getting absentee ballot request forms out, that kind of thing, and that we expect that work will continue.
Thank you. Next question, the addition of drop boxes at the Board of Elections, it's been helpful to our communities. Do you support keeping them in place and for the entirety of the election cycle?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And there have been some that have wanted to get rid of the drop boxes that we have here in Ohio. What we did in Ohio, what I ordered the boards of elections to do is what can only be called the most massive expansion in drop boxes that the state's ever seen. Prior to my administration, we believe there were only 4 or 5 of them around the state. I think Franklin County had one, Cuyahoga County had one. There were a few county boards of elections that had them, but there was always this question of whether there was a good legal underpinning to have those or not. And if somebody were to challenge them, would they have to, not offer that service? So what I did is, based on what we were working through in the pandemic election, I told every county board of elections to make them available. Because again, one of my important responsibilities is that equal protection responsibility of making sure that every Ohio voter has the ability to engage in some of these conveniences like this. What I told them was to have one at each county board of elections so that you've got a 24/7 opportunity. To be clear, what this supplements is mailing in your absentee ballot, which is, by the way, still the way that the vast majority, 90-something% of voters return their absentee ballot. And we want to emphasize for people that it's still the best way to return your absentee ballot is to mail it in. But that's the way my wife and I have done it. When you do mail your ballot in, you can go to our website, voteohio.gov, and you can track your ballot just like you track a package that you would order online, and you can make sure it's received at your county board of elections. But if you don't want to do that, if you want to bring it to the board of elections in person, every board has a 24/7 drop box available. Now, if there were a desire to expand them beyond the location of the board of elections, that's something that would have to be done by the state legislature. I can tell you quite candidly, they don't have an interest in doing that. So for me right now, what I want to do is protect what we have, and that is the secure drop boxes that are under video surveillance, that are emptied multiple times a day by bipartisan teams at the boards of elections. That is a convenience for Ohioans, and it's one that under my administration is going to remain.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Simon. Now we're going to move to Reverend Dan Clark. Reverend Clark is the director of Ohio Faith in Action. And Reverend Clark, I'm going to skip our number 5. I'm going to ask you to go to 6. Questions 6 and 8.
All right, thank you, Gelada. Hello, Secretary LaRose. I'm Reverend Dan Clark, Faith in Public Life, Ohio. The question I have for you is there a set standard or practice of boards of elections announcing changes in polling locations? We know that often these locations can be changed without input or questions from the community. Many boards of elections do not advertise their public meetings nor the content of those meetings, so citizens become unaware of these kinds of changes. So is there a standard or practice of BOEs announcing these changes to polling locations?
Yeah, thanks, Reverend. And first of all, it's important to understand the structure of Ohio's elections administration. And this is something that most people don't really think about, but it is an incredibly decentralized organization, meaning each county runs elections in that county. My job is to try to create standardized rules to make sure that everything runs pretty efficiently from everything from the lake to the river throughout the whole state. But each county really runs their own elections, and it's 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats at each county board of elections. Those 2 Republicans and those 2 Democrats serve on the board of elections because they are nominated by their county Republican Party or county Democratic Party, which means that it is the people of that party that chooses who's going to be their representative on the board. No decision is made at the county board of elections unless you get that bipartisan agreement. If there's a tie vote, it would come to me, but that happens only very rarely. And so this is a success story. In the year 2022, it feels like in Washington, Republicans and Democrats can't agree what day of the week it is. But at your county board of elections, this work of running elections is done in a thoroughly bipartisan way. So anything like moving polling locations, changing polling locations, that occurs with a bipartisan vote. And so if the Democrats in the county don't like that, they should talk to the 2 Democrats that serve on the board of elections. If the Republicans in the county don't like that, they should talk to the 2 Republicans that serve on the board of elections. Those decisions are often made out of logistical necessity, to be quite honest. Nobody wants to move a polling location. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, let's move a polling location. But oftentimes a polling location will say, hey, we're no longer going to make our church available to you. Or a city will say, we're no longer going to make our recreation hall available to you. Remember that we're guests at these facilities. And so sometimes that happens. Sometimes the ADA accessibility is not up to standard. And so we'll relocate a polling location to better accommodate our disabled brothers and sisters. Sometimes there's construction. We've had major resurfacing projects that are going to have a road in front of a polling location closed down during the month of voting. And so we'll change a polling location so that people can actually get there. So those are the kind of things that happen. What is required is, first of all, they discuss that in an open meeting at the Board of Elections. They vote to set those polling locations. And then there is a set requirement for how they notify people of that. Those are supposed to be made days, weeks and weeks in advance. There are occasions where there's an emergency that will occur and it'll necessitate a last minute polling location change. Again, that's to be avoided at all costs. Under the normal course of operations, it happens a few months in advance, and the boards of elections are directed to send by mail a notification to the voters that their polling location has changed. They're also required, and this is a new thing that I require them to do, to post a sign on the door at the old polling location that says, "Hey, this is your old polling location. Here's the address, and here's a little map of how to get to the new one." They notify the public through their social media channels and the media. Sometimes it's hard to get people to report on these kind of things, but those are all the efforts that we undertake in order to notify people of a polling location change. I will say this, I work really hard to ask voters to check their voter registration information. Simply go to voteohio.gov. It takes about 2 minutes. You type in your first name and your last name, and you can make sure your information's up to date, that you're registered to vote at your actual voting address, and you can see right on there what your polling location is, and for that matter, who's going to be on your ballot. So maybe you can do your research ahead of time. Those are all things that happen. It's not perfect, and there will always be somebody that didn't get the word, but folks that are engaged and follow the process should be well informed when there's a polling location change.
Okay, thank you for those responses. A question I have now on a totally different topic. We heard you say earlier that a priority in your office is being sure that people don't cheat. So how does your office handle intentional voter misinformation? Are there penalties for groups or individuals that spread incorrect election information? We often hear about penalties for individual voters who commit fraud, but not about penalties for intentional misinformation. We know that things like robocalls and flyers and mailers and billboards target poor communities and non-English speaking communities, giving wrong information. So how can we in the community report this kind of activity? How does your office handle intentional misinformation?
Good. Yeah. And to be clear, what I said, my mission and my focus is making it both easy to vote and hard to cheat. And those are two sort of parallel priorities and things that go together. They're not competing priorities. They're actually things that bolster one another. And I think things that both Ohioans want. They want it to be trustworthy. They also want it to be convenient. Here are a few things that we've done. First of all, I know that the history of this, and it's unfortunate, but the fact is that more often than not, it is minority communities that have been targeted with election disinformation. And so we got proactive about this because I know that, as much as I want to be a source of accurate information, it's even more powerful when it is somebody from within your own community that's sharing that accurate information. So we did election disinformation seminars around the state where we asked minority community leaders, faith community leaders, groups like the A. Philip Randolph Institute and the NAACP and the Urban League and many others helped us organize these. And we laid out a PowerPoint presentation of what is disinformation. How do you kind of demystify it, right? First of all, it's really propaganda. That's what we would have called it just a few years ago, but we have this new word for it. So we want people to understand what election disinformation is and then how to combat it. And also how to report it when it occurs. And so those minority community sessions that we did helped empower community leaders to be sources of accurate information, but also to be our eyes and ears. And here's where it worked. I'll give you really two examples. One was targeting students and one was targeting minority community. In Cleveland in 2020, there was an ugly racist robocall that was launched that told members of Cleveland's minority community that if they engaged in early voting or absentee voting, that information could be used to track them down for a arrest warrant or to come after them if they had debts that were unpaid. Obviously, those things are untrue and ugly, racist things to say. Because of the relationships we had built within the community, we got that reported to us, I think, within minutes of that robocall. In fact, I received 2 or 3 phone calls on my cell phone from some of these faith community leaders. Some of them had been on the ball enough that they actually recorded the call. We had the FBI and local law enforcement, as well as the state attorney general's office, working on that case within minutes. And so it was a 2-pronged approach at that point. One was combating the false information by getting accurate information out to the community and letting people know that this was an ugly lie and it's not true. But the second part was the law enforcement side of it, where we were able to actually track these people down. They were arrested and they have been convicted and faced justice. Thankfully, the federal law enforcement got involved because this was happening both in Ohio and in Michigan. So I partnered with my friend Jocelyn Benson, the Michigan Secretary of State, and we were able to secure a conviction against these people that did this. Another example was targeted at students. There was somebody on social media who was on a platform that communicated, that had a following among Ohio State students. And they said this person claimed to be a resident assistant. They worked at a dorm, right? Worked at a resident hall. And this person said that as part of that duty of being a resident assistant, they work in the mailroom. They distribute student mail to their dorms. And this person said that I know who the Democrats in my dorm are, and I know who the Republicans in my dorm are. And if a Republican requests an absentee ballot, I'm going to throw it away. I'm not going to deliver it to them. Well, we were able to engage immediately with Ohio State University. And first of all, we verified that this person was lying. They were not a resident assistant. So it was a completely false thing that they were trying to create fear among students. We were able to message the student body that they could trust absentee voting and that this was a lie. And then we notified this individual that the thing that he was bragging about doing on the internet is actually a felony, and he should stop going on the internet and admitting to committing felonies. And so, those are just 2 examples. There were many others of success stories in 2020 where we engaged at the granular level when those kind of things happened and were able to counteract them. By the way, it continues through early voting and on election day. I'd love to host any of you, if you're ever down here in Columbus, to come see our office. We have put together an entire disinformation team on election day. They monitor social media because often that's where it pops up. That's kind of the canary in the coal mine. We have a whole team of staffers that are just kind of watching on social media, and we've been able to respond very quickly to those kind of things, and again, make sure that only accurate information is getting out to Ohioans about how to be a voter.
Real quickly, I just wanted to share, I put our report ohios.gov. So if you are experiencing or see disinformation, that email is in the chat, as well as our disinformation overview for your viewing. Thank you.
And my personal email, by the way, and obviously it's probably best to go through that official email that goes right to the team that does this, but you can always reach out to me because the buck stops here, and this is something that we will not tolerate. It's just frank@ohiosos.gov. Doesn't get much easier than that, frank@ohiosos.gov.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that, Secretary LaRose. I'm going to back up a little bit right now, change the order, and I'm going to ask Reverend Carlos Malavi. Reverend Carlos Malavi is the director of the Latino Christian National Network, and I'm going to ask him if he would please ask the question about translation services number 7. Reverend Malavi.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Secretary LaRose, for your service to the people of Ohio and for being with us today. I have a simple question. In the state of Ohio, you have close to 500,000 of Latinos and Latinas. About half of those have the capacity, the ability to vote, but every vote counts. So one thing that we know happened not only in Ohio, but in many other states, is that our Latino folks often feel intimidated entering into the process of the electoral process. One of those things is language. The other thing is that it's just, for many of them, they're learning for the last several years in the culture of voting in the US. And so my question is, if your office is concerned and have some responses in place to provide some kind of assistance in terms of language, in terms of translating, instead of helping, in terms of helping people in the voting booth with issues of language. Obviously, you cannot necessarily have a Spanish-speaking person in every place of voting, but hopefully I'd like to hear from you if you have a plan to address that issue.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, and thanks for the work you do to represent this vibrant, wonderful part of Ohio's family, the Hispanic community. I got to tell you that I've had the chance to preside at naturalization ceremonies, and anybody that's never attended one of these, it is one of the most heartwarming things you'll ever see. And it's seared in my memory, seeing 250 people standing there in the atrium of the Ohio State House, holding their little American flag on a stick, raising their right hand and taking the oath of citizenship. They were so excited to join our big American family. And afterwards, we had a voter registration table in the back, and you should have seen the rush of people. As soon as they'd taken that oath of citizenship, after hugging their family, the next thing they wanted to do was go and register to vote. And I know that people who earn the right to vote often take it more seriously than those that are born with it, to be very candid. And so it's something that we care about. And by the way, any naturalization ceremony that we know about, we want to be there. And if we can't, we'll have the Board of Elections there to do a voter registration table. We have worked with the Ohio Hispanic Affairs Commission. Mo, did I get that name right?
The Ohio Latino Commission, LAIR.
Yep, the Ohio Latino Commission. And so they've worked to help us translate a lot of our materials, including some of the videos that we've put out. That's something that we've leaned into. Also, there are some counties in Ohio where there's a large concentration of Spanish speakers that are actually required to have multilingual ballots available. And as you all know, the language, particularly in like a ballot initiative or a tax levy, that can be pretty hard for native speakers to understand, let alone somebody who speaks English as a second language. So having that translated is important because we want people to be able to make informed decisions when they're casting a ballot. One of the other things, and this was simple, when I first came into this office, I came up to visit the folks at the Cleveland Site Center, which is a group of blind Ohioans that runs our call center. Basically, the phone work of our office, when somebody calls 877 SOS Ohio, they're talking to an Ohioan who's blind. And so, because obviously they've got a great voice and a great mind, their eyes just don't work the way ours do. And so they can have great employment as the call center. When I was up there, I asked if we offered, this was in the first month I was in this office, I asked if we offered multilingual support. And they said, oh no, you only have English support. And I said, well, could you offer multilingual support? And they said, oh yeah, absolutely. All you have to do is authorize it. And I said, it is authorized, turn it on. And so immediately when I took this office, we switched over to make sure that our phone service has multilingual support available. Final thing is this, and this is not possible everywhere, but we have encouraged our boards of elections when they assign poll workers to try to assign multilingual poll workers to the neighborhoods where they're needed. And by the way, it's not just our Hispanic community, Latino community, it's also our Somalian community here in Columbus. It's the Nepalese community. There are a lot of very diverse ethnic communities around Ohio that speak English as their second language, and having people from that community sign up to be a poll worker, that's how it starts. And by the way, please encourage people in your coalition to sign up to be a poll worker. VoteOhio.gov, they sign up to be a poll worker, and then their Board of Elections can assign them to a polling location where their language expertise may be helpful. And that's something that we really focus on. Again, it's not perfect. We've got close to 4,000 polling locations in Ohio. We can't have language support at every one of those 4,000 polling locations, but we really make an effort to make sure that people that do have ability to speak multiple languages are assigned to the correct polling location.
Thank you so much. I know we're getting close to the 2 o'clock hour, and I know you have to run. I do want to get through these last couple of questions, if that's okay with you, Mr.
Sure.
Secretary. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
And then I'll wrap up with a call to action at the end, if that's all right.
Well, that'll be great. Reverend Dr. Johnson. If you would, please ask a question about materials and about the redistricting. So that would be 9 and 10.
Yes. Secretary LaRose, thank you, as it's already been lifted. Appreciate your time. Very quickly, just your office, does your office, I should say, have various education pamphlets, videos, or materials explaining some of these things that you've highlighted today, the do's and the don'ts, the calendar of information, et cetera? And would you be able to share that information with this group for dissemination to our respective organizations and congregations?
Yeah, thank you, Reverend. Absolutely. And I'm going to ask Monique to maybe put some of this into the chat here. All of this stuff lives at photoohio.gov, which is our official website. And by the way, remind people that there's a lot of, well, I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know. There's a lot of false information out there on the internet. We have a technical term for this in elections administration. We say that there's a lot of BS out there. So we got to make sure that people have accurate information. And so always look for that .gov website. That way, you know, you're at an official state or county government website. The .gov is an indication that you're not at some fraudulent site. So voteohio.gov is our website. And we've got materials there that go over what's a post-election audit. By the way, we just got done auditing the May 3rd election. A lot of talk about audits these days. We always audit every election. We had a 99.9% accuracy rate. That's good news. It's hard to get the media to report on that because it's just not a great headline. Like, hey, the Board of Elections doesn't screw anything up is not a compelling headline. But we audit every election. So there's a video there that talks about how we do post-election audits. There's a resource that talks about all of the things that we do to make sure Ohio's elections are honest, because let's be clear, we all know people that have their conspiracy theories. Maybe they've watched too many YouTube videos about crazy stuff with elections. And so we try to make sure that we give accurate information. As I always say, we all have an Uncle Norm, like Uncle Norm that forwards along the email about secret algorithms in the voting machines or some other, silly thing that's just not true. The best way to respond to Uncle Norm when he shares those things is with this simple little infographic we put together. It's at voteohio.gov/secure, voteohio.gov/secure, and it goes through all the things that Ohio does, not all of them, the big ones that Ohio does to keep our elections honest, and why people can go to the polls knowing confidently that their vote's going to be accurately reported. We recorded a video about how does early voting work and how does absentee voting work. Try to sort of demystify that a little bit. In fact, when you go to the website to learn how to do, I think it's on online voter registration, you're going to hear Monique's voice because she narrated that one and did an excellent job and talks through how you do online voter registration. So these are just a few examples. Again, we're especially around election time, in that sort of month leading up to election, we put this stuff out in a steady stream from my social media accounts, which again is just at Frank LaRose on all the different platforms. And I'd encourage you to share that with your folks as well.
Okay, well, thank you. And then my follow-up question, and I'm the provocateur in the circle, and I'm here in Columbus, so we can talk directly. I'm not using the privilege of this platform to hide, so to speak. But just if we may ask, you're a member of the Ohio Redistricting Commission, and you did vote initially for the first two maps. But some of your commentary and testimony revealed by your own admission that you saw some problems with the process and the maps. Do you mind kind of explaining that and why that might appear one way to some of us in one light versus the other?
Yeah. So first of all, to start, when I first came into the state legislature in 2011, I was an advocate for reforming the redistricting process from the very beginning. In fact, the first time there was a bipartisan resolution introduced to create a more balanced process, it was a resolution that I wrote along with one of my Democratic brothers from the Senate, and then there was a Republican and Democrat from the House as well. The four of us introduced that resolution. And by the way, that's what eventually led to the reforms that were passed last decade to change the way that we do this in Ohio. So when I was doing that, I undertook a 50-state analysis. And the fact is, and I'm going to be very blunt about this, there is no perfect way to do redistricting. It's messy in every state. In some states, it's done by the state legislature. In fact, most states just do that in the state legislature. So if you've got the majority, then you can draw the maps. In some states, there are commissions that are created, and there's different ways that they put people on those commissions, but it is almost always, no, it is always a political process. Both sides care deeply about it. And depending on how the maps come out, one side's going to love it and one side's going to hate it. I was hopeful that the process that we created in Ohio could lead to consensus, because what we designed is a redistricting commission that put both Republicans and Democrats at the table and then compelled them to compromise. Compromise is not a failure. Far from it. It's how statesmen and women solve problems, and it requires give and take on both sides. For this process to work required that kind of compromise. Now, let me tell you about my greatest frustration over the last year, and that is that neither side was willing to compromise. I remember back in September when we finally got the census data, and that's the other thing, we started 6 months late because the Census Bureau didn't get us the data on time, and you simply cannot draw maps without census data, not possible. So once we got the census data, we had a very compressed timeline, but I was trying to pull meetings together with the Republicans, trying to pull meetings together with the Democrats, and to roll up our sleeves and try to get things done. Let me tell you about the kind of things I heard. From my Republican colleagues, I was enormously frustrated by some of them saying, well, we have the majority. The voters of Ohio have put more Republicans on the redistricting commission than Democrats, and that's true. It's the governor, the auditor, the secretary of state. All three are Republicans. That's a choice that Ohioans have made. And so they said, because we're in the majority, we can just do what we want and draw maps that benefit our party. I disagreed with that. I said, that's not how this should work. We should work to compromise. But there was an unwillingness by my Republican colleagues to compromise. At the same time, when I met repeatedly with my Democratic friends on the commission, they said to me they didn't want to compromise either. In fact, they looked me in the eye and said, we're going to get what we want in the court. We're going to get our way through litigation. So why would we negotiate against ourselves by giving up something right now? We're going to hold out for the big prize in the court. Well, guys, that's the definition of a broken negotiation. When both sides come to the table and really don't think that they have any incentive to work together, then a negotiation can't happen. And that was deeply frustrating for me. And I expressed that frustration that this process was not being carried out correctly. Now, as you know, in any legislative body or any commission, it takes a majority to get things done. You got to have a certain number of votes. The majority of this commission is Republicans. And I guess the burden of being in the majority is that you eventually have to make a decision. When you're in the minority on a group, you don't have to, but when you're in the majority, you got to get something done. And the maps that were put in front of me, I believed met the bare minimum constitutional standard. They weren't good maps, but I thought were bare minimum constitutional maps. And so I voted with the majority to put those, to make those maps final. Now, here's my look going forward. We need to look at creating greater incentives for both sides to actually compromise, and trying to force Republicans and Democrats to compromise on something as high stakes as redistricting is hard. Look at states like New York and Illinois, where Democrats are in charge. You had the same mess just on the other side. And so both sides are going to try to use this process to benefit themselves. I want to see competitive districts. I think that the ideal is to create a maximum number of competitive districts where both Republicans and Democrats have a chance of winning, and then go out there and compete for the votes to win that election. That's my hope going forward. By the way, this is confusing. It's confusing for me, and I'm at the center of the storm. We've created a resource for people. If you want to know what district you live in, if you want to know where the district lines are, voteohio.gov/districts. Please put that in the chat. And there's a interactive thing there where you can type in your address and it'll show you what district you live in. I'll end with good news because I'm the eternal optimist. The result of this back and forth between the Ohio Supreme Court and the Redistricting Commission, and let's be very clear, there's some pretty profound disagreements between us and the Ohio Supreme Court, but the result was that the map that is now being used for this August 2nd primary election that's coming up is a map that has 54 Republican districts and 46 Democratic districts. That's exactly the proportion that the court ordered us to do. And so the Republicans on the commission would tell you that they gave up a lot. They feel like they've given away too much in some cases. The Democrats don't feel like they got enough. I understand that it's always kind of in the eye of the beholder on this, but the fact is that the maps that were created for map 3 create 54 Republican districts and 46 Democratic districts. And that is the proportionality that the court ordered us to do. Now, where the disagreement came in is how competitive are those districts? Are the Democratic districts too competitive and the Republican districts too safe? I understand that there's a disagreement on that. But again, at least what we came up with is a more balanced process than we would have had under the old rules. And it was much harder to draw these funny shaped districts. It required a lot more compactness in the new rules. So the old nonsense like snake on the lake and all these spiderweb districts and that kind of thing are simply not possible under the new rules. And so it has gotten marginally better, but not as good as it can be.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. I know we've gone over time. I'm going to push for just one more. I'm surprised you didn't bring this one up. Morgan, this actually was going to be your question. It's the last one, but we really wanted to ask you about what we refer to as the purging of voters. I know every secretary I know of any party doesn't call it that. You use another term for it.
Yeah.
But, I know that we know that people that haven't voted in 4 years, 2 federal election cycles, and they get sent a card. When is your office scheduled to do the next purging of voters, and will we have access to those lists as in the past?
Gelada, that will happen after the next election. And you're right, we don't call it purging. That's got a very sort of ominous sound to it. We call it voter list maintenance, and it's what we're required to do by both state law and federal law. And the goal behind that, by the way, is that, first of all, we encourage people to participate in the process. And as long as you vote at least once every 6 years, or update your state driver's license or state ID at least once every 6 years, or respond to the mailing that we send you. If you take any of those actions or sign a petition, if you do anything to tell us that you're still alive and at that address, then you stay on the voter rolls. And so the real goal of this is we don't want people taking 6 years and not voting, right? Because think about it, if you've not voted for 6 years, you've missed 12 elections, at least 12 elections, because in some years there are 3 elections like this year. So you've missed at least 12 elections if you haven't voted in 6 years. But you're right, what the law requires is that if you've missed those six years of voting, 12 elections, if you have not responded to the multiple mailings that we send you, if you haven't updated your driver's license or state ID, at that point, the assumption is that you are one of the 3 Ds. And this is a little thing that I came up with: deceased, that's self-evident, departed, meaning that you've moved out of state, or duplicate. And sometimes duplicates can be created, right? I'm Frank LaRose Jr. If I registered to vote when I lived in Akron as Frank LaRose Jr. and I registered down here as Frank LaRose, maybe the system could have actually had a duplicate registration. So there could be an orphan registration left back home in Summit County. Those kind of things do happen with a dynamic database of 8 million people that's constantly changing, such as the voter registration database. So we do follow that process because we want Ohioans to know that we keep accurate voter rolls. And we're constantly reminding people to just simply go to voteohio.gov, check your information, make sure it's up to date. Voter registration is something we work really hard on. We put a ton of effort into getting people registered to vote. The last thing we want to do is remove somebody from the voter rolls unless it's absolutely necessary. In fact, one of the programs that I'm really proud of that just ran, and we do this every spring, is what we call Grads Vote, where we send out voter registration forms to 150,000, every Ohio graduating high school senior. And that Grads Vote packet is supposed to be put in right there with their diploma when they graduate from high school. So they get a voter registration form and information about how to do it online if they don't want to use the form. Here's an innovation, Gelada, that my team came up with, because what I looked at when I first came in 2019 is that the law requires me to do this thing where after 6 years, we have to remove registrations that we believe are deceased, duplicate, departed. But we know that mixed in there are probably some proportion of people that are just have become inactive and just don't vote anymore. We want to find them and keep them. But we also know that there's a room for human error, right? You think about it, you got 88 different county boards of elections with 88 different sets of keys on 88 different keyboards. The room for margin of error is high. And so what we started doing is crowdsourcing this list. Now, to be clear, going back 30 years, Republican secretaries of state, Democratic secretaries of state, going all the way back to like Jennifer Brunner and Ken Blackwell and Bob Taft and Sherrod Brown. Secretaries of state have just on a certain day deleted those registrations that have been inactive for 6 years. They just hit the delete button and poof, they were gone. What we did was say, instead of doing that, let's get ahead of this process by a few months, 6 months or so, and let's put that list out there and say, in 6 months, these 200,000 whatever registrations are going to be deleted. Let's see if we can find them. And so by crowdsourcing that, two things have happened. We've been able to engage with community organizations that have found people by knocking on their doors or talking to them in the back of church or whatever and saying, hey, your name's on this list. If you haven't voted in 6 years, all you got to do is respond to this little mailing from the secretary's office or go on this website and we'll keep you in the voter rolls. But the other thing we do is we found errors. And that's not a failure, that's a success. Some people that want to play politics with these kind of things tried to attack me for this and said, oh, look, there were 10,000 errors in the purge list. Well, in the bad old days, nobody would have ever known. And those 10,000 would have just been deleted because we crowdsourced it and we were transparent about it. We found those errors and we fixed them. And those 10,000 people then didn't get deleted from the voter rolls. And so I think that what we found here in Ohio is a better way to do this necessary process, but it relies on community partnerships like all of you.
And did you say that or did you send us the link to where that list will be?
It's already out there. That list was published months ago. And what we've said is we wanted to publish it way back in the spring, but we don't want to do the removal, the removal of voter registrations until after this election, because we wanted to give people a chance to vote. And as long as they vote this November or this August, if they vote anytime, then they will be kept and their voter registration will be refreshed for the next 6 years or forever. And so, yes, that list is out there. Monique is your direct point of contact, or Henry for that matter. If you need access to that, we can break it down by zip code for you. If you want to find the people that are within 2 miles of your church and go try to knock on their doors, that's exactly what we're encouraging people to do. And again, what you're going to find is like 80–90% of them are deceased, departed, duplicates. They're just bad data. But there may be a small percentage out there that are people that have just stopped voting. We need to find them and get them to re-engage in the process.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure that it's after the November election and not in between August and November.
Absolutely.
The link is in the chat.
Okay, all right, I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much. I know we went over. This has been very enlightening, very helpful. Mr. Secretary, thank you. Thank you very much, Monique, for helping to set this up. I want to thank all your staff for cooperating with us and those that have joined us today. Is there any other comments? Dr. Skinner, did anybody else want to say anything?
I just had one more comment. I would love the secretary to touch on real quickly, restore your right to vote, because it's very dear and dear to his heart and mine.
Okay.
Restore your right to vote is about making sure that reformed citizens know that they can have the right to vote. Now, I wanted to name this program Get Out and Vote, because like get out of jail and vote. But Mo thought that was, yeah, I know. I thought it was funny.
Nah,
but,
bro. Nah.
right.
Dr. Johnson is like, no.
Nah, thank you, Monique. Thank you for keeping it real.
So we called it Restore Your Right, but that's what it is. Once you are out of incarceration, you can vote, right? And that's what we wanted people to know. And by the way, our faith tradition is all about second chances, right? At least I know that in Christianity, it's all about second chances, and it's about being able to, turn your life around. By the way, so our state law believes in second chances. If you have been on the wrong side of the law, once you've done your time, you can be a registered voter again. In fact, we've worked to partner with Department of Rehabilitations and Corrections to make voter registration part of the pre-release thing that they do. that's not working as well as I want it to yet, but it's something that Mo and I have continued to work on. But it's one of those rumors that exists out there. If you talk to people, you'll hear people say, well, I'm a felon, I can't vote. Well, that's not true. Once your time is done, once you've gotten released from prison, you can vote in Ohio. It's easy to do. There's nothing standing in your way. And by the way, we know that one of the best things we can do to prevent recidivism is to get people re-engaged in their family, in their jobs, in their community. And what better way to engage in the community by, signing up to be a voter? Yeah, you may have broken the law, but now you get to help choose the people that are going to make the laws. And that's a pretty empowering thing.
Fantastic.
Can I wrap up with the call to action that I wanted to share with everybody?
You absolutely can.
Hey, real quick, and this is I made these little signs up and posted them all over the walls in our office. It's a quote from Abraham Lincoln. The quote, I'm gonna paraphrase it. It says, "The elections belong to the people. It's their choice." I think I got that 99% right. And so that's from Abraham Lincoln. Those words are still true today. That's the way we approach this work. We're just the stewards. We're just the caretakers. We're helping run the elections for the people of Ohio, but it's their election, and whatever they choose, we respect the voice of the people whenever they speak. We're having another election on August 2nd. We need to help get the word out. Ohioans need to know that they're going to have the same 3 convenient choices they always have: a month of early voting, a month of absentee voting, and in-person election day from 6:30 a.m. till 7:30 p.m. But here are the 2 calls to action. We need people to get registered to vote. And so somebody who turned 18 this year who's not registered to vote. I know you do. Reach out to them and help them get registered to vote. It takes about 2 minutes. They can do it on their smartphone at voteohio.gov. It's easy to get registered. If you want to do a voter registration drive, we'll send you as many boxes of voter registration forms as you want. In fact, if I can, I'll come to worship at your church, and afterwards I'll stand in the back and have my clipboard and help get people, I should say church or synagogue or any place of worship, and help get people registered to vote. That's something that we do. So voter registration is key, and it takes all of us to help. But the second thing is this, poll workers. It takes about 40,000 Ohioans to run election day. Think about this, 4,000 polling locations staffed by close to 40,000 election day volunteers from both parties. And it's hard to recruit poll workers for an August 2nd election. We're doing it. We're working hard at it. In Ohio, 17-year-old high school students can be a poll worker. As long as you finished your junior year and you're getting ready to start your senior year, you can be what's called a youth at the booth poll worker. We have Ohioans of all different abilities. I've worked with our MRDD boards and that kind of thing. If the only thing that you're capable of doing is passing out the I voted sticker, then fine, that's what we'll have you do. We have people of all different abilities from both parties that participate as poll workers, and you get paid for your time. But most importantly, you're doing a great patriotic duty by being a poll worker. So voteohio.gov is also the place to sign up to be a poll worker. If you've never done it before, give it a try. It's more fun with a friend as well, and you'll learn a lot about the process. And by the way, you'll learn why I say with confidence that it is easy to vote and hard to cheat in Ohio. And that's something that all of us should embrace.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been extremely helpful. We appreciate your time, Mr. Secretary. And
Jolanta, could we, just on behalf of Faith United to Save Democracy team of Jim Wallace, Reverend Terrence McKinley, and Adam Taylor, and myself, Mr. Secretary, thank you so much. It's been very energizing and helpful. We will be sending out frequently asked questions, and we want to thank Monique for putting in the chat all the ways that we can get in touch with you if people have additional questions at frank@ohiosos.gov. We appreciate that. If anyone is interested on this call to be involved in our next voter justice activities between now and November, either Gelada or myself, you can be in touch with us or go to turnoutsunday.com, turnoutsunday.com, where you also find our voter justice toolkit. So thank you all for being on the call.
thank you so much. Now we will ask Reverend Adam Taylor, who is the current president of Sojourners, to give us the closing remark and close us out in prayer.
Well, thank you. I want to thank you, Gelada, for your exceptional leadership And thank you, Secretary LaRose, for all that you shared. And thank you, Monique. We believe in the power of prayer. We are a multi-faith coalition. So let us close with a word of prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for all that we have learned. We know so often our communities, our people can suffer for a lack of knowledge. We pray that we could help impart so much of the knowledge we've heard today so that together we can indeed ensure that there is a accessible and fair and safe and secure election in Ohio. God, we pray for every election official, including Secretary LaRose. We pray for every poll worker. We pray for every volunteer and person that'll be involved in this electoral process. Lord, we pray that, as we've been reminded on this call, every single person can exercise what we know is a sacred opportunity and right to use their voice and cast their vote. And we pray that we could work against every form of disinformation and suppression that seeks to deny not only that right, but from our faith perspective, seeks to deny and denigrate the very image that is in each and every, your very image that's in each and every one of us. So God, give us courage and strength as we go forward, as we seek to do your will, and as we seek to ensure that there is indeed a fair and secure election in Ohio and beyond. It's in your precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks,
you.
everybody. God bless
Thank
each and every
you.
one of you. Get out and vote. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you.